resigned from the staff of the International Monetary Fund after over 12 years and after over 1,000 days. Hawking your medicine and your bag of tricks to governments and to peoples in Latin America and in the Caribbean and in Africa.
Bueno, yo considero que la situación, o sea, la crisis económica.
I consider that there's no comparison to the economic crisis that Nicaragua is going through right now. I've lived under 3 governments. Even under the dictatorship of Somoza, where there were problems, at least there was work and I went to school. Under the Sandinista government, there was a war and there was a blockade, but there wasn't hunger. We were never without rice and beans. But now, even with my husband, Daniel, working, we have passed times without being able to eat.
In the 1980s, the policies of the government were implemented in such a way that while people did not have a lot of luxury, they at least had a job. Now, in the 1990s, the economic policy of the government of Nicaragua is by and large being dictated by the World Bank and the IMF. So when we talk about 60% unemployment nationally and 90% unemployment on the Caribbean coast, we are saying that the World Bank, the IMF, in collusion with the central government of Nicaragua, are the culprits.
The goals of the World Bank are to eliminate poverty through achieving, in partnership with member governments, sustainable economic development.
The World Bank is actually an international development organization.
Its role is to lend money to the governments of its poorer members, often called developing countries.
This money is used to increase economic productivity and to improve the standard of living of people in these countries.
Since its inception, the IMF has sought to help its members grow economically. Such growth, the product of an international system of free trade working to benefit all people, has been nurtured as the fund's member countries have used the institution in imaginative and flexible ways. For over 40 years, the International Monetary Fund, in the spirit of Bretton Woods, has met the need of an ever-changing world.
The bank has been about this work now for 50 years, coming out of the end of World War II, when it was understood that unless we achieved equitable development around the world, the conditions that create conflict and war would continue and lead to additional conflict.
United States Treasury Secretary Morgenthau heads the American delegation. On the opening day, in his role of acting conference president, he addresses the meeting. To be discussed are plans for the stabilization of world currencies. All agreements must be ratified by the governing bodies of the nations involved before becoming effective.
You have to take into account who these organizations serve. These organizations were never intended to help poor countries of the world. These organizations were created to strengthen the recovery of the economies of Europe, fundamentally, and of course, the United States. In that respect, I would have to say they are doing a good job.
The United States gives a quota each year of money to the International Monetary Fund and to the World Bank as a member. And because it has 17% of the vote, that means that the United States has tremendous influence. A lot of that money is used to make low-interest loans to these governments so that they can pay the debt to the banks on Wall Street, to the banks in London. So my tax dollars, in fact, are not necessarily going to a development project in Nicaragua. They might end up at one of the banks on Wall Street.
Si me busca un gordo en la bolsa, yo le enseño la bolsa, mire. Sin mentir.
Look, I don't have any money. My pockets are empty. I'm not embarrassed that I don't have any money. Where am I going to find it when this country keeps getting more and more in debt? Each Nicaraguan now owes $3,000 to $4,000 to foreign creditors. What is it like for Nicaraguans not to have any money in their pockets? Where can we get this money?
Nicaragua's debt is known as the highest per capita debt in the world. In the late 60s, early 70s, the OPEC nations had a lot of money from oil that they were putting into banks. So banks had a glut of money, so they went traveling around Latin America and offering this money to dictators. They didn't do their homework necessarily to see, well, are they going to use this money responsibly? But they poured millions and millions of dollars into Latin American governments in loans.
If we carry on servicing this incredible debt, Nicaragua never will recover a normal economy because the external debt is paralyzing the economy and is polarizing the country, because the external debt is one of the main causes why Nicaragua has 60% of unemployment and why Nicaragua, over 70% of the total population, is under poverty level.
We have faith in God that the World Bank will help us to find solutions to all of our problems.
Nicaragua started the negotiations with the IMF and the World Bank in order to sign the agreements of the structural adjustment just after the victory of Doña Violeta. The first agreement was signed around 1991, and the debt goes on increasing, polarizing this country.
The overwhelming issue, the overriding issue, has become structural adjustment policies pushed by both institutions across the South and Eastern Europe. Structural adjustment grew out of the debt crisis of the late 70s and the early 80s, and at first adjustment was aimed at squeezing every last dollar or peso out of these countries. So you would have austerity, so you'd cut budgets and you'd squeeze credit, and with that money that you save, you would pay off your debt. And banks wanted their money back, so it was serving commercial lenders. But then the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund learned that you could open up economies in this way too, to direct investors and to financial and portfolio investors. And you could use cheap labor, and you could get around the type of environmental restrictions that are home here in the States and in Europe. So that's really what adjustment has become, at the expense of the poor.
The rationale behind structural adjustment is to put governments and economies, national economies, on a footing which will enable the country to effectively participate in a global economy and to create conditions in which, for example, rampant inflation are brought down so that people can count on a stability in an economy in which their labor and their efforts can result in an income that can provide for themselves and their families.
Habichuelas no se pueden comer.
Mi padre es un campesino, muy humilde. Él no sabía leer ni escribir.
My father was a small farmer, a humble man. He didn't know how to read or write. During my father's time, we didn't have much, so I wasn't able to go to school. At that time, you could get by a little easier, because my father told me that if he planted 1 measure of beans, he would harvest 40. The lands were fertile. Today, it's not that way. If you don't use fertilizer, you don't have a harvest. And from 1990 on, we were no longer given loans to prepare our fields. For the small producer, there just aren't any. If you can't get a loan, you can't afford fertilizer, and you don't have any harvest at all.
Structural adjustment in Nicaragua has meant a general cutting of funds available for credit to farmers. Within the priorities of the Nicaraguan government, the money that has been available has been channeled mainly to large farmers, although even the large farmers would complain about the levels of credit that they've had. The tendency in the country, supposedly, under the structural adjustment agreements, is to increase exports. But the money, the investment money, has not been made available to be able to do that. So you have a contradiction. At the same time, you have the world, in economic terms, telling everyone, you've got to be efficient and you've got to be competitive. But farmers in Nicaragua didn't have the same period of time that farmers in Europe and North America did, where over decades, they became more economically efficient and more productive. And they had lots of subsidies and lots of financing from their governments to do that. Nicaragua comes out of a war. Suddenly they wanted the farmers to be efficient and competitive, but there's no money for investment. And that's a direct result of structural adjustment.
Yo tenía una venta bastante surtida. Buen abastecimiento tenía.
Before 1990, I had a very well-stocked store with a variety of goods. From 1990 to 1995, I have seen a decrease in business here in the store. There are many things we cannot buy, and we see that many businesses are experiencing the same crisis. A crisis which is related to the economic situation here in Nicaragua, because the consumer doesn't have work and earns very little. So we sell very little, and we are getting poor because we don't have the means to overcome the situation.
Vendemos muy poco. También nosotros los empobrecemos porque no tenemos cómo superar esta situación.
We have seen tremendously destructive measures in countries from Nicaragua to Zimbabwe to the Philippines. People being made to pay the price. People had nothing to do with the debt. People have no gain whatsoever from opening the economy. We have seen small businesses wiped out, small farms wiped out. They can't get credit. They can't get technical assistance. Cheap imports are coming into the country. These imports are destroying these small enterprises. Wages are going down. This is particularly the case in a country like Nicaragua, or a small country like Nicaragua.
I always hear people say on the street, before, during the Sandinista times, there was war, but there was never hunger. Now, there is no war and there is hunger. No matter what house you might visit, there is nothing to eat because people don't have jobs. As a woman, the economic crisis affects me greatly. I am in the house all day, I clean, I wash, I cook. I worry about not having enough money for health care for my sick baby Nora, about not having enough money for shoes for my eldest. I worry because I can't afford the food and the textbooks that are necessary.
Most World Bank loans are for specific development projects. They may help farmers to grow more and better crops and to earn more income from them, help to set up small businesses, or to provide health care, housing and education to people in rural areas as well as in towns and cities.
The International Monetary Fund says to Nicaragua, you have to balance your budget. The government had to cut social programs, and they did so to the tune of 50%. As unemployment rises, health care, education, welfare services decrease dramatically. So that has affected the urban population immensely.
¿Por qué me llevan si solo he venido a protestar por mi salario, nada más? Solamente auxilio,
La demanda del Magisterio Nacional, digamos, son...
There are four general aspects to the teachers' demands. The first has to do with salaries. Currently, the average salary of a primary school teacher is $60 a month. And the average salary of a secondary school teacher is $70 a month, which in the present situation really is not enough to cover the basic needs of daily life. Since 1990, over 4,500 teachers have been laid off as a result of the policies imposed by the IMF and the World Bank. These policies have resulted in the closings of schools, the cutting of special programs such as literacy, adult education, and bilingual intercultural programs on the Atlantic coast. Also, the schools are now charging tuition. This has meant the reduction of the number of students who have access to education.
resignation is a priceless liberation. For with it, I have taken the first big step to that place where I may hope to wash my hands of what in my mind's eye is the blood of millions of poor and starving peoples.
Por eso, como yo estaba sin empleo, yo me fui a trabajar porque yo no tenía.
Because I could not find work here in Nicaragua, I couldn't feed my children. So I went to Costa Rica while the girls stayed with my mother. I was working there for a few months, then I returned to Nicaragua in December. I came back here to be with my girls and to look for work. I am still unemployed, and I am very worried because I am alone and I have to take care of my children. A lot of my neighbors said there was work at the free trade zone, so I went there for a week. Every day I went at 5 in the morning until 12 in the afternoon. There were huge lines of people waiting beneath the hot sun. Then this man came out and said to us, "Come back tomorrow." Everyone came back the next day, and the exact same thing happened.
One of the pieces of structural adjustment is that you need to bring investment into your country, foreign investment. So governments are very willing to set up what they call free trade zones, where they will give huge tax cuts to these foreign investors who will come in and set up a factory in Nicaragua, for example, in Costa Rica, in Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala. All of these countries need this investment so badly that they're even willing to let these investment people know that they can come in and get around the labor code, which means in the free trade zone out here by the airport, labor unions are not allowed to organize. Most of the folks who work in the free trade zones are young women, and most of these women do not complain about the conditions because the owners will say, "You don't like it? There are 1,000 women outside the gates looking for a job. We'll see someone else in your place tomorrow." And so I think it's that kind of pressure, and is literally treating people almost as slaves. But the government is willing to do that because of these agreements which prioritize foreign investment.
The government is trying to increase the amount of space and opportunities for Zona Franca because they are a way to create jobs. We could say that in some cases the jobs are not well paid, as you can hear from part of the population. Unfortunately, right now the options is either we have jobs not well paid or not job at all.
Las habichuelas no se pueden comer. Una libra de arroz y una cuarta de café. A nadie le importa qué piensa usted. ¿Será porque aquí no hablamos inglés? Es verdad. Es verdad. Es verdad. Do you understand? Do you?
The Fortune 500 corporations want to go global. They want as few restrictions as possible on the movement of their capital. So that's really what adjustment has become, and I think we have to look at it in that way. If we don't understand what's behind this, who's interested behind it, adjustment makes no sense because it is failing so miserably. It is destroying the productive capacity of countries. Nicaragua is a perfect example. We're destroying community, we're destroying family, we're destroying whole economies, and we know better.
Time is up for the World Bank!
organisation, SEEK, which, as Mariana said, numbers actually 2,200 groups across the country in different campuses, has begun a divestment program in universities. It's begun with a pilot at Boulder, Colorado, where the university administration holds just over $2 million worth of bonds, and the students there have started petitioning and will escalate their tactics until they have to do block-ins or do whatever they need to get that university administration to divest those funds. Once that works, we will replicate that across the country throughout our networks until it sends sufficient political signal to you and sufficiently muddies your reputation in this country.
You can hold me individually accountable, but you have to understand I'm one of 24 executive directors, and that I am directed by the U.S. government on the vote that I cast. And I'm not saying this to hold myself any less accountable, but only for you to understand the levers of change.
We've been involved in international solidarity work for the last 5 years, and we have made the connections on how the structural adjustments programs that the World Bank and IMF policies do in the world also affect us here in this country, where we have high unemployment. We got a war against women and children that's terrible. Welfare reform is nothing but structural adjustment.
I bring greetings from the Philippines, especially to the Philippine delegation, to remind them that 39 million Filipinos live in absolute poverty, that 109,000 children die before reaching the age of 5 because there is no money to pay for health, but enough money to pay the debts to the World Bank and the IMF.
For the first time, the world is a global village. For the first time, Nicaraguan people, Nicaraguan economies know what has been happening in Africa, know what has been happening in other Latin American countries. We know the failure, the substantial failure of these policies. Basically, the IMF and the World Bank and the regional banks like the Inter-American Development Bank are controlled by the United States or by the group of 7 big nations in the world. If we don't democratize these financial institutions, I will say that this failure that we had in the last 50 years in the development policies will continue.
In Asia, in the Pacific, in Latin America, in Africa, people are saying in factories, they're gathering in farms, they're talking in urban shelters, they're praying in the churches, and they're all saying 50 years is enough. World Bank.